Welcome to the first of what is hopefully mini Q&A sessions powered by you, the viewer. I'm going to collect questions over the next month to create the next video. So if you have any questions, please throw them down in the comments below so that I can answer them next time. The questions from this video are brought to you by one of my longtime supporters, Susan. Somebody who's been a delight to be in touch with over the years, and she had a little accident with her hand, so she's spending time watching videos and learning and kind of gearing up, getting ready to slingshot out once she can be back to playing. And she had a bunch of questions about strings and understanding what kind of strings to get, what she might need, those kinds of things. And we'll answer a bunch of great string questions here. But before we begin, if you like my content, please like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. And check the info box down below for ways that you can support the channel, because this takes time and effort and all those things. And it's nice to also keep the lights on. So thank you very much. So Susan has some very specific questions and also some broad questions. So we'll start with one of the broad ones, and that is, what do we need to know to make a choice for new strings? And I've got it broken down here into a couple of different things. You need to know the scale length of your ukulele. That is how long it is from the nut to the bridge. And this is usually wrapped up in just the general size of the ukulele, unless you have one of those super instruments where it's like a super concert or a super tenor. Those have different scales on the same size body. So that's a little confusing, but that is your problem to solve if you have one of those. But generally, if you have a soprano-sized ukulele, you're going to look for a set of ukulele strings that's made for a soprano size. Really straightforward. Some different strings, like Worth strings, will have a soprano/concert size, and those will fit either instrument. The tension is appropriate for either instrument. But when you have a length of ukulele, a distance that you're stretching the string across, you're going to have a certain tension when you tune that string to a given pitch. In this case, our bottom string is A. Not confident that that's in tune. These are super old strings, but you have an A tuned to that pitch along this amount of distance. If I tune this string to A on a longer ukulele, the tension is going to be tighter because we're increasing the length at the same pitch. We're increasing the amount of pull across that string. So the diameter of the string is adjusted to match the size of the instrument and the scale length. So that's really important for getting a correctly sized ukulele string set. Something else you're going to want to consider is the stability of the strings, how well they stay in tune. Some string technologies are a little bit kind of older, some are newer, and generally in my view, this is not technically complete or completely accurate, but in my view, there's like the modern fluorocarbon fishing line strings, and there's the older like nylon based technologies. Even if there are newer nylon based technologies, a lot of times they have the same characteristics. So I kind of lump them all the same in my own head. This is not completely scientifically correct. But usually the nylon strings will move more as you adjust temperatures and humidity and things like that. The nylon strings will change pitch. If I have my ukulele nicely tuned in this room and then I take it outside, a lot of times the tuning is going to change over the course of 5 or 10 minutes. It's going to move as it goes to the new environment. So a ukulele that has nylon strings on it is going to tend to move more than an ukulele that has the fluorocarbon strings on it, which tend to be a lot more stable. Okay, moving along, you have the tone of the string. Usually the fluorocarbon strings have a brighter sound. They're a little bit more poppy. They have just kind of a nice attack to them. The nylon strings are a little bit darker, and you listen to somebody like maybe Troy Fernandez, an old school ukulele player, or Peter Moon. These guys played old school nylon strings on all of their famous recordings, and so it has that little bit darker kind of thumpy sound. That is that technology. The newer players, most of the virtuoso players that I'm familiar with, they're all using fluorocarbon just because they project and ring and they're stable and it has all these nice benefits. and that's what they're running usually. Finally, the intonation. Fluorocarbon tends to intonate, so as you play higher up the neck, if you play the harmonic, it's a soprano, I'm not used to the missing dot up top. So you have the harmonic, and then you play the fretted note, 12th fret, 12th fret. They should match. That means the intonation is correct. This is a whole nother long topic. But basically, they need to match. And if they don't match, it means that you're playing out of tune as you go higher up the instrument. Fluorocarbon tends to intonate a little bit better than the nylon. The nylon can move around and be a little bit less stable in that aspect. But those are the general overview things, and now we can get into a little bit more specifics about actual string sets. High G versus low G and the differences in the strings. Basically, one is tuned above middle C and the other is tuned below middle C. And in order to do that, the low G string is a specific kind of string that you'll get for your ukulele. It has a different gauge, a different diameter, so that the mass of the string can equate to a nice tension along the scale length when tuned to a certain note. If I try and tune this high G to the low G pitch, it's like a rubber band. It sounds really flabby. The harder you play it, it's gonna tend to go woo and settle into the pitch. It's not gonna play super in tune. And it just feels really flabby and weird. So you get a different size string so that the feel across the strings is gonna be kind of similar to each other. That is high G versus low G. How you play them is a whole different story. That's a lifetime of study. But in general, the low G has a more, it's called the linear tuning because all the strings are in order from low to high. It has a little bit warmer, bigger sound because of those extra low notes on the bottom end. The high G is a little bit more of a traditional sound, a little bit more plinky, as some people say, but it has the brightness and the tightness of having more notes closer together because the range isn't quite as far because you're going high, low, and then back to high as you move through the strings. Can the strings make a uke sound more mellow or more brighter, etc.? Yes, a lot of times the reason you will change string types on an ukulele is to balance the sound out. When I first got my spruce top Bordessa, it was super duper bright, and I put Worth strings on it at the very beginning, and it was just like, just bright, bright, bright. And I wanted to mellow it out a little bit, so I put Savarez Alliance strings on there, which are, I can't remember if they're like a nylon thing or a monofilament. I don't think they're fluorocarbon. Maybe, but they have a darker sound. It's a little bit, they have a little bit more of that thump without the super extra high end. So I ran those on that ukulele for a couple of years until the ukulele mellowed out. And now I've gone back to Uke Logic or Worth fluorocarbons to bring back the brightness now that it's kind of matured. So you will definitely try and match the strings to the instrument depending on your taste. Some people will like fluorocarbons on a koa ukulele. The koa tends to be a little bit darker and a little bit more woofy in the mid-range. That's a nice combination to me. Some people like the stock nylon GHS strings that Kamaka puts on their ukuleles. That's fine too. It's really just all about what you're going for, and the strings are kind of the main contributing factor to the sound of the ukulele outside of your playing style and the instrument itself. So you can definitely aim the strings to be one thing or the other depending on the instrument. How does a newbie know if they would like different strings? This is really hard to know, and it's a big rabbit hole. Once you start changing strings and trying things out and, testing out the different sounds that you can get, you can spend all your time just trying strings as opposed to actually playing. So basically what I would do if I was a newbie is I would decide, okay, do I like ukulele players? Do I like listening to ukulele players who have a dark sounding ukulele or a bright sounding ukulele? And I would go in one of two directions. I would get a set of Worth clear strings, or I would get a set of D'Addario or GHS or some nylon string that's a little bit warmer in sound, or somewhere in the middle might be like Worth Browns or something. But that way you can just kind of go in the direction you want to go, use those strings for a while, play them for a while, get better at the instrument, and then you can, as you go, decide, oh, I want to maybe try this other thing or this other thing. But I know people who spend like very little time playing because all they do is try strings, and that's not a healthy thing. If you want to improve at the instrument, just play it, even if the strings aren't ideal. I don't know if the strings that I use are the best strings for me. I could continue to search, but I choose not to because it's really not going to make that much of a difference at this point. I just need to be playing music and practicing and writing songs and doing those kinds of things with the strings that I have. And I encourage you to take a similar mindset, get something high quality, and it's going to be good enough. Okay, Susan's next question. Do higher priced strings sound better than lower priced strings? Usually, sometimes, it depends. The Worth strings that you might run across, or Uke Logic, some of these strings might seem like they're a lot more expensive, especially Worth because they pack 2 sets of strings in the same package. So you're basically paying for 2 sets at once, which doubles the price, and it seems like, oh my gosh, it's $14 for a pack or whatever it is now. Used to be around there. It can seem like a lot, but you're paying for 2 sets, and a lot of times when your money is going towards that higher quality material, it does sound better. But it really depends, because if you like that darker old school sound, you might get away with a super cheap, they used to be Hilo strings. I don't think they even make them anymore, but it was Pegasus Guitars made Hilo strings, and you'd get those, and they were like $3 a pack or something super duper cheap. And if you like that sound, that's great. That's fine. But it's going to tend to be that the newer fluorocarbon strings are a little bit more expensive than anything that is nylon. Next question. How do you know your strings need replacing besides them breaking? This is a little bit tricky because it depends. If you don't play your ukuleles a whole lot and they've just been sitting, the strings might be okay. But a telltale sign is that they won't tune, or you have a hard time tuning. Or when you tune them and the tuner says it's correct, they still sound like they're out of tune. They don't sound like they're actually in tune. For me, that's the biggest thing, is I tune my ukulele, but it just doesn't quite sound right because the intonation is kind of stretched all out of whack. And I'm going to tend to want to change the strings at that point. Another thing that tends to happen with the fluorocarbon strings is sometimes they wear out. There gets to be like divot spots on the string where you're pressing them onto the fret all of the time. There will actually be a little chunk taken out of the string, and eventually that can lead to a breakage. And sometimes the fluorocarbons get a little ding in them in processing or manufacturing, and they will start to fray, and you'll end up with kind of like hairs and strings actually coming off of the string, and you can peel them away. Then you definitely need to replace at least that string, because it's just a matter of time before it breaks. And a lot of times it takes away from the tone because there's a little dreadlock wad of hairs kind of hugging the string and killing its ability to ring out fully. But mostly it's going to be when they start to sound out of tune, and they'll also start to sound kind of dull and lifeless compared to when they were new. Generally, I tend to change my strings every couple of months. I know people who have gone for years and years before ever changing their strings, but really it kind of just depends on your preference once again. You might find that fluorocarbon strings, as they darken and mature, have a nicer sound for you, and when you put the new set on, they're too bright again. So it really depends. If you like them 5 months in or 8 months in, that's great. Main thing is that you can keep them tuned. To me, that's the most important thing. If a string breaks, are all the strings replaced? It really depends on how old the set is for me. I tend to get just loose strings. Joel from Uke Logic sends me just a wad of loose strings in all the different gauges. So if I break an A string, I just pull out a new one and I'll replace that one string if the set hasn't been on that long. Ukulele strings don't break that often. Usually if you break one, it's going to be the A string, or it's because you have a sharp spot on your ukulele. If you're always breaking the same string or it's always breaking in the same spot, you really need to examine the instrument and make sure there isn't something that is sawing away at the string or causing harsh pressure or angle bends on the string, because they shouldn't really break. That's kind of a rare thing. But when they do, it's because it's an A string and maybe it's fluorocarbon and it has a flaw in it somewhere, or it started shredding, and then it'll just kind of let go and give up. And in that case, it's good to have some spare A strings around. I know Joel does or used to ship a spare A string with his sets, because that was the string that would usually wear out fastest out of everything. And you might not want to replace the rest of the strings at the same time that you replace the A string if it's a new set. If it's an old set, you might as well just replace them all. Strings are cheap in the big picture, and it's a nice quality of life, and it can honestly kind of inspire you to want to play again, because your ukulele is going to sound fresh and new and bright again. Okay, Susan's next question: can different brands be used on one instrument? Yes, absolutely. I've been doing this for many years. I don't know if you can see on the camera quality here, but there's actually 3 pink Uke Logic strings on this ukulele, and there's 1 clear Savarez harp string. And what I do is I always use the Savarez low G. It's the KF95. The KF95A is what I buy, because you get 3 lengths, 3 low Gs out of a single string length. But I've always liked the way that this low G feels. It's an unwound, and unwound low Gs tends to either be too light for my taste or too heavy. And this one kind of threads the needle right down the middle, and it's been really nice. But that kind of tension doesn't come with most ukulele sets. So like when Joel sends me strings, he doesn't even send me a G, because he knows that I will just replace it anyways. And so I have C, E, and A from either Joel or from Worth strings. And then I'll use the Savarez KF95 for the low G. So you can mix and match. Really, it's mostly about getting a nice balance between the strings. You don't want to have one string that's kind of just off by itself with a funny sound. Sometimes that's all you have, and you just put it on and you run it that way. That's fine. But a lot of times you're going to try and get a cohesive sound across the strings, so they all kind of work together with the same general tone, the same general characteristic, and the same general feel. And if you can do that, mix and match to your heart's content. If not, then that's usually why people will stick to the strings that are in a certain set, because they're matched to work together from the get-go. Next question: do certain ukulele brand names require certain strings be used? No, absolutely not. Lots of times we'll see an ukulele ship from the factory with a certain kind of strings on it. I believe Kala comes with Aquila. Koaloha's Forever came with Worth. The Kamakas come with their proprietary Kamaka strings, though I'm pretty sure they're just GHS strings. But you can change the strings on any ukulele to get a different sound, to get a different feel, and that's sometimes a nice thing to do. In the case of like the Koaloha that comes with the Worth strings, that might be the nicest string you're going to get on that instrument, or the nicest type of string you're going to put to match that instrument. Because a lot of times companies, especially when you're buying higher end ukuleles, they want to show off the best potential sound. And if you put low end strings on that ukulele, it's not going to shine to its true potential. If you're Kala and you're selling $50 ukuleles to people all over the world at a just ginormous scale, you don't have to put the best strings on, and you're going to try and save a little bit of money by using a little bit cheaper strings. That's fine. But if you put fluorocarbon strings on a Kala, you're going to notice a bigger improvement probably from putting fluorocarbon strings on a Koaloha, because you'll be just replacing old fluorocarbon strings that were already there. This goes hand in hand with the next question, which is, does putting new strings on cause other adjustments to the instrument? Meaning, like, do I need to change anything if I put new strings on? And the answer is, it depends. Sometimes. Usually, if you go to fluorocarbon strings from nylon strings and you make that transition, it's not going to be a problem, because the nylon strings, because of their material and their mass, they don't need to be as thick in diameter as the nylon strings to achieve the same tension across the scale length. So the fluorocarbon strings are going to be smaller in diameter, which means they're going to fit in the nut slot. 99% of the time, the only problems are going to appear at the nut. Unless you're putting on maybe like the super extra heavy duty Worth low G, sometimes the hole won't be big enough at the bridge. But I've never ran across this personally, but it's been close a couple times. But usually it's the nut that's the problem. When you're going to fluorocarbon, it's usually not a problem because the strings sit right down in the middle of the nut slot. It's all good. When you'll run into problems is when you go from high G to low G, because the low G has to be a thicker diameter to get that lower note. It's going to tend to ride up in that high G nut slot, unless the nut is slotted to also accommodate low G, which a lot of them are these days, but it depends. If you restring the ukulele and you put a low G in there and it's sitting up way higher than the rest of the strings, remember you're going to be, the height is going to be from the bottom of the string. So it's a fatter string, so it will look like it's higher than the rest of the strings on the ukulele, but the bottom of the string touching the frets is where the height matters. And if that's a lot higher than the other strings, then you might need to file out the nut slot to make it a little bit wider and to fit it in there. If you're going from fluorocarbon strings to nylon strings, you might run into a similar problem. Usually not, but sometimes the nut slot will be just a little bit too snug for the nylon string and you have to open it up just a little bit. When you're filing nut slots, if you choose to do it yourself, you can fold up a piece of fine grit sandpaper and just work it back and forth. You mainly just want to widen it. You don't want to adjust the bottom because the bottom is where the height of the string is adjusted. And you don't want to mess with that. That's already set from the factory to be buzz-free or from your setup or whatever. You just need width to fit the string in, that ways. This is a huge deep dive video, but these are really great questions from Susan. Once more, a reminder, if you have any kind of ukulele question or any kind of question for me, throw it down in the comments below and I will cover your questions in the next video. These videos are probably not all going to be this long because Susan came in with just this clutch list of great string questions. And so I figured I'd cover them all in one video. Here's another one. How should extra strings be stored? Can they get too old? The only time you're going to have problems with ukulele strings getting old is if there is a wound G string or a wound C string, or wound low strings for the baritone folks as well, because those can corrode depending on your environment and depending on how they're packed. I've never noticed any kind of nylon or fluorocarbon, like solid plastic material string ever going bad from sitting. So I don't think you have to worry about that. You can store them anywhere, just keep them dry, keep them at room temp, don't cook them in your oven, simple stuff. Okay, 2 more questions. Should extra strings be in your ukulele case? Absolutely, because the day that you don't have extra strings in your ukulele case is the day you will probably break one, you'll need an extra string, and you will be out of luck. So you just always keep strings in your case. It's really cheap insurance, and it's one of the very few things that you need as far as accessories go as an ukulele player. And when it's time to change the strings, they're just right there for you to do so whenever you feel like it. Maybe you're at the park, I'm gonna change my strings. And finally, a list of more popular brands and why they are popular. Yeah, so when you go into a music store, usually they'll have a few options of different kinds of strings, assuming it's an ukulele music store. You might not have options if it's a guitar store and they just have a pack of ukulele strings if you're lucky. But as far as like ukulele string options go, you're gonna see a few different brand names. Worth, I always have promoted Worth for the past 15 years. They're great. They're a nice baseline for fluorocarbon. Uke Logic by Joel Bleshinger out of Hawaii Music Supply. They're wonderful. They're kind of new. He's still getting everything dialed in and figured out perfectly. Those are really nice. Lots of people like Oasis and Living Water. But with the fluorocarbon, you have to think that most of this stuff is all just fluorocarbon fishing line. People are literally buying rolls of high-end, high-grade Japanese fishing line, and they sit there and they measure off and they cut and they measure off and they cut and they put them in packs, and that's your ukulele strings. It's really not rocket science. It's not a proprietary thing. It's not like somebody has an ukulele string machine where they're extruding their own ukulele strings. This is all borrowed technology. Hopping over to the older nylon technologies, those will tend to have their own custom extruders and the way that they like machine them down to the right diameter. So those are not necessarily, they're not working off of rolls for those. But you're going to tend to see Aquila is a little different because they have their Nile gut thing that's supposed to sound like old school catgut strings, but in a stable nylon form. You have D'Addario titaniums is somewhere in between. Those are nice. That's what Jake uses, I think, or he uses some sort of D'Addario. I'm really kind of out of the loop on a lot of the newer options because I've just settled on my strings, and that's just what I use because it's not important to me to be searching for ukulele strings anymore. There's also the Ko'olau, like Alohis. Those are gold. They're kind of weird. They're kind of really, really dull and dark if you like that sort of a sound, and kind of low tension. And then there's the GHS strings that I believe Kamaka uses, and those are just kind of like baseline, boring, plain Jane black nylon strings. Really, there's not a lot of bad stuff out there. If you're paying a decent price from a decent retailer that you trust, they're not going to stock anything that's bad, and anything that you put on your ukulele is going to do the trick. It's going to be okay. More importantly, I think, is making the choice between, do I want fluorocarbon, do I want nylon, and just going from there. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, if you like the channel and you want to support, check out the info box down below. There are links to my premium lessons and ebooks where there's way more information about playing. That's my highest quality content that I create, and it's a wonderful way to get some more ukulele learning in your life. And you can also find links to my newsletter and my podcast and the other free resources that I continue to provide. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to submit your questions down below, and I'll catch you next time. Hui ho.